It was supposed to be a simple stop, nothing more. Gloria Harris, a black woman in her mid-40s, walked into the corner pharmacy just before closing time, the weight of another brutal double shift pulling at her shoulders. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a cold, sterile glow over the nearly empty aisles. She moved quietly, with that kind of tired grace that nurses carried after years of caring for everyone but themselves. All she needed tonight was her blood pressure medication, a refill she had picked up dozens of times before without incident. She approached the counter with her ID, insurance card, and the little paper slip her doctor had signed. The young clerk behind the register barely looked up, scrolling on his phone as he sluggishly took her paperwork. Gloria waited, shifting her aching feet, feeling the minutes stretch unnaturally long. She caught the way his brow furrowed as he stared at the computer screen, how his fingers hovered uncertainly over the keyboard. He mumbled something under his breath and disappeared behind the counter, leaving her standing there alone under the flickering lights. A moment later, the manager appeared, a white woman in her late 40s with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She walked over slowly, the heels of her shoes tapping a stiff rhythm against the tile floor. Gloria straightened instinctively, offering a polite, patient smile. But the manager didn't smile back. "There's a problem with your prescription," the woman said, her voice overly sweet, in a way that immediately made Gloria's stomach tighten. "I've been filling this prescription here for years," Gloria replied, her voice even and respectful. "You have my ID and my insurance. Maybe double-check?" The manager didn't even glance at the documents still lying on the counter. Instead, she gave a small, dismissive shrug and said, "I'm afraid we'll have to involve the authorities." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. Gloria blinked once, trying to process the words. Authorities? Over what? Her voice dropped to a careful, steady calm. "There must be a mistake. I haven't done anything wrong." The manager stepped back, crossing her arms defensively. "Please, stay right here," she said sharply, loud enough that two customers lingering near the cold medicine aisle turned to look. Gloria could feel the heat of their stares, could feel the weight of being seen, judged, assumed. The boy behind the counter wouldn't meet her eyes. The manager disappeared into the back office, and a few seconds later, Gloria heard it. The soft click of a phone being picked up, the low, urgent whisper of a call being made. Her throat tightened. She knew exactly what was happening. It wasn't the first time she had felt this shift in the air, the subtle current that wrapped around you when someone decided you didn't belong. The silent accusation that screamed louder than words ever could. She had felt it growing up, walking into stores, applying for jobs, sitting quietly in waiting rooms. And now, standing in a pharmacy she had trusted for years, it was happening again. The first faint wail of a siren floated through the heavy Georgia night air. Gloria could have left. She could have turned around, grabbed her documents, and walked out the door. But she knew better. Walking away would be seen as guilt. Staying would be dangerous too, but it was the only way to prove the truth. She stood her ground. Customers whispered behind their hands. Someone pulled out a phone, pretending to scroll, but angling the camera toward her. Gloria held her head high, refusing to shrink, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing fear. The manager returned, her face taut with a mixture of fake concern and quiet triumph. "Please stay calm," she said, a hand fluttering unnecessarily. "The police will be here shortly." Gloria didn't respond. She didn't need to. Every second that ticked by was thick with judgment, with the unspoken assumption that if something was wrong, it must be her fault. That if there was a problem, it had to be because of her. Outside, the red and blue lights flashed against the storefront windows, casting warped shadows across the linoleum floor. The door chimed sharply as two police officers entered, both white, both exuding that easy confidence that came from knowing the system was always on their side. The manager practically rushed to them, pointing a stiff finger in Gloria's direction. The lead officer nodded without even glancing her way, one hand resting casually on the handcuffs at his belt. Gloria's heart thudded once, hard and low. She inhaled slowly, deeply, centering herself the way she had before countless emergencies in the ER. No panic, no fear, only steel. Because they thought they could frame her. They thought they could humiliate her, erase her dignity in a single night. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. Not yet. Hours earlier, the evening had been soft, heavy with the smell of rain on the warm Georgia air. Gloria had stood in the tiny kitchen of her modest apartment, spooning leftover soup into a cracked ceramic bowl. She had smiled a little to herself, the kind of tired smile that only came when you finally knew the day's battles were over. For a moment, it was enough just to exist quietly, without anyone asking anything more from her. She leaned against the counter, slipping off the sneakers she had worn for 18 straight hours across the hospital floors. Her feet throbbed, her back ached, but she had made it through another day. Patients stabilized, charts updated, exhausted families comforted. She was good at her job. She was proud of it. The TV buzzed softly from the living room, some old rerun she wasn't really watching. In the corner, a framed picture of her and her late mother smiled back at her. Two women with the same stubborn chin and fierce eyes. Gloria's mother had taught her from a young age that being black in America meant being twice as good, twice as patient, twice as careful. It was the only way to survive a world that would look for any excuse to tear you down. She sipped her soup slowly, savoring the moment of peace. Outside, the streetlights buzzed on one by one, their yellow light pooling on the cracked sidewalks. A few kids rode bikes up and down the block, their laughter floating through the night air. The world felt almost gentle, almost safe. Her mind drifted to the simple errands she needed to finish before finally collapsing into bed. Pay a bill online. Pick up her prescription. Maybe call her sister if she wasn't too tired. Normal things. Ordinary things. The kind of simple life Gloria had spent decades building. A life of dignity, of quiet strength, of carving out a place where she could breathe. She checked her watch, wincing slightly at the late hour. The pharmacy would be closing soon, but she could still make it if she left right away. She grabbed her worn denim jacket, stuffing her insurance card and ID into the inside pocket where they would be safe. Habit. Survival instinct. You never wanted to be caught without proof of who you were. Not in a world that could turn on you without warning. Locking her door behind her, she stepped into the thick night air, the scent of magnolia trees clinging to the breeze. Her old sedan sat faithfully under the flickering street lamp. She patted the hood once, a silly ritual for good luck, and slid behind the wheel. The streets were mostly empty now, the sidewalks rolled up, the world settling in for sleep. As she drove, Gloria hummed under her breath, an old gospel tune her mother used to sing when the days felt too long and the nights felt too heavy. She didn't know all the words, but the melody wrapped around her like armor. When she pulled into the pharmacy parking lot, there were only a few cars left scattered across the asphalt. The building itself glowed faintly under the harsh buzz of fluorescent lights, looking more tired than welcoming. Still, it was familiar. Safe, or so she thought. She parked under the street lamp, a little away from the front entrance. Habit again. Park somewhere visible. Somewhere where cameras could see you, witnesses could see you. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival. As she turned off the ignition, Gloria took a breath, deep and steady. Just a quick pickup. 5 minutes, maybe 10, and she'd be home again, tucked away from the world. She didn't know, couldn't know, that the world outside wasn't ready to let her go so easily tonight. That the simple act of walking into a place she had trusted would become the spark for a night she would never forget. There was no way to see it coming, no way to prepare. She gathered her things, opened the car door, and stepped out into the warm night air, calm, tired, and unaware that the storm was already waiting for her inside. The moment the cops stepped through the pharmacy door, the atmosphere shifted. Heavy boots thudded against the linoleum floor. Conversations died mid-sentence. A woman in the greeting card aisle stiffened, clutching her child's hand tighter. Gloria stood still, her hands visible, her ID and insurance card carefully held out in front of her like a shield. The first officer, a tall man with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl, barely spared a glance at the paperwork. He looked at her like she was already guilty. The second officer, younger but following his lead, hovered just behind, uncertain but silent. "That's her," the pharmacy manager said quickly, pointing a shaky finger at Gloria. "Tried to pass a fraudulent prescription. No evidence, no questions, no investigation. Just a decision made in a heartbeat." Gloria watched the officers exchange a quick look, one that said everything. They weren't here to ask questions. They were here to remove a problem. The lead officer stepped forward, hand resting on his belt near the handcuffs. His voice dripped with condescension. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step outside." Gloria's pulse thudded against her temple, but her voice remained calm. "I have my ID, my insurance. You can verify it right here." The officer didn't even glance at the documents. He just smiled slightly, that same tight, superior smile she had seen too many times before. "We can do this easy, or we can do it hard. Your choice." Customers edged away, pretending to browse while sneaking glances. A man near the cold medicine aisle pulled out his phone, recording silently. Good, Gloria thought. Let them see. She stood her ground. "I've done nothing wrong," she said, steady as stone. The officer's hand snapped out, grabbing her wrist roughly. Gasps rippled through the pharmacy. The handcuffs clicked around her wrists with a metallic finality that echoed in her ears. She kept her body loose, refusing to give them an excuse to escalate. Fighting would only feed their narrative. They turned her roughly, pushing her toward the door. She caught the glint of satisfaction in the pharmacy manager's eyes and locked eyes with her, refusing to show even a flicker of fear. Outside, the night air hit her like a slap. The flashing red and blue lights painted the parking lot in a chaotic dance of color. Someone across the lot shouted something about injustice. Another person pulled out a phone, recording everything. The officer shoved Gloria toward the squad car, ignoring her quiet protests, ignoring the documents she still clutched in her hands. Her ID fluttered to the ground, forgotten and trampled under a careless boot. The second officer hesitated, glancing around at the growing crowd. Doubt flickered across his face, but he said nothing. Gloria caught that flicker and stored it away. Weakness. The lead officer yanked the car door open and pushed Gloria inside without ceremony. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into her wrists, but she didn't cry out, didn't flinch. She sat upright, shoulders squared, head high. Inside the car, the world looked different, distant, muted, like she had crossed an invisible line, one she might never get back over. The officers chuckled quietly in the front seat, talking about paperwork and how late they were going to be getting off shift. She wasn't a human being to them, just another arrest, another box checked. From the corner of her eye, Gloria saw more people gathering outside the pharmacy. A woman with braided hair was arguing with another officer who had arrived late. A man in a security uniform gestured angrily toward the cameras now aimed squarely at the scene. The lead officer looked back at Gloria once, sneering. "Guess you should have thought twice before trying to scam people." Gloria didn't answer. She stared straight ahead, jaw tight, breathing slow and measured. Every instinct screamed at her to shout, to fight, to rage against the injustice slamming down around her. But she didn't. She waited. Because she knew something they didn't. Something they would soon learn in the hardest way possible. They thought they were humiliating a tired black woman who wouldn't fight back. They thought they could bury her under false charges and paperwork, just another small injustice swallowed up by the system. They didn't know who they were dealing with. Not yet. The car pulled away from the pharmacy, sirens off, lights flashing low as if they already knew they wanted as little attention as possible. Gloria watched the faces blur past her window, some angry, some afraid, some simply resigned to a story they had seen too many times before. She felt the metal cuffs biting into her skin, felt the shame burning low in her gut. But above all, she felt a slow, steady flame growing inside her. Hotter than fear, sharper than humiliation. She wouldn't beg. She wouldn't cry. She would remember. And when the time came, she would make sure they remembered, too. The squad car turned a corner, disappearing into the night, carrying Gloria Harris toward a station that thought it could crush her spirit before the sun rose. But they were wrong. The real fight was just beginning. The station smelled of stale coffee and old disappointment. Gloria sat stiffly on a cold metal bench inside the small holding cell, her wrists aching from the too tight handcuffs. The fluorescent lights above buzzed harshly, throwing ugly shadows across the grimy floor. She kept her head high, even as the desk sergeant barely glanced at her while typing lazily into his computer. She had been processed like she was nothing. Just another case number, another black face they could shuffle through the system without a second thought. The lead arresting officer, Coleman, leaned against the wall outside her cell, arms folded, smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He thought he had won. He thought he had buried her under a pile of lies and false charges before anyone even knew she was gone. "You know," he drawled, tapping the bars lightly with his knuckles, "if you just admit you tried to scam that prescription, maybe we can make this a little easier for you." Gloria didn't respond. She didn't blink. Silence had power, and right now it was the only weapon she had. Coleman chuckled low under his breath and sauntered off down the hallway, his boots thudding against the scuffed floors. The younger officer, Miller, lingered a second longer, shifting uncomfortably before following his partner. Gloria sat back against the cold wall and closed her eyes for a moment. She wasn't praying. She wasn't hoping for mercy. She was waiting. Because while they laughed, while they joked about their easy win, something was already moving outside these dirty walls. She knew her father would have gotten the call by now. Walter Harris wasn't just a retired man puttering around his garden. He wasn't a forgotten name tucked away in a dusty file somewhere. No, Walter Harris had been one of the highest-ranking officials in the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. A man who had spent his entire life dragging corrupt police departments into the light. A man who had made it his mission to tear down exactly the kind of casual, systemic racism that was now clinking cold and tight around her wrists. He wasn't the kind of man who made noise unnecessarily. He was the kind of man who moved mountains when needed, quietly, efficiently, without leaving survivors in his wake. And tonight, his daughter needed him. Gloria opened her eyes and stared at the barred door in front of her, calm and steady. She could already feel it in the air, the shift, like the first electric tension before a thunderstorm breaks. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang. Once, twice, then again. Urgent now. Angry voices rose and fell behind the thick glass of the administrative office. Gloria heard a chair scrape roughly against the floor, heard hurried footsteps. The energy inside the station changed, like animals sensing the coming quake. The desk sergeant glanced nervously at the hallway, his fingers pausing over the keyboard. He picked up the phone reluctantly, his voice low and tight. "Savannah PD. Yes, sir. She's here. Yes, sir. I understand. Right away." The sergeant's face was pale when he hung up. He didn't look at Gloria, didn't say a word. He just stood there, rooted to the spot, swallowing hard. A second later, Miller appeared in the hallway again, his hand twitching at his belt, unsure what to do. Coleman stormed back into view, face flushed red with confusion and anger. "What the hell is going on?" Coleman barked toward the desk. The sergeant didn't answer. He didn't need to, because the answer was already walking through the front doors. Two men in dark suits entered first, clean-cut, grim-faced, their movements precise and heavy with authority. Federal agents, not local, not friends, not allies. And then behind them, slow and deliberate, walked Walter Harris. His presence filled the room like a thunderclap. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. He simply moved, calm and controlled, with the kind of cold fury that made grown men take a step back without even realizing it. Coleman straightened up instinctively, his hand falling away from his belt. His smirk dissolved as realization set in. Walter's eyes swept the room once, sharp and cutting. Then he fixed his gaze on Gloria, offering the smallest nod. It wasn't for show. It wasn't to reassure her. It was a promise. He was here, and everything was about to change. The heavy glass doors of the precinct swung open with a force that silenced the entire lobby. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. It was as if the very building realized the balance of power had shifted, and the old rules no longer applied. Walter Harris stepped inside like a storm wrapped in a suit, flanked by two federal agents whose sharp eyes missed nothing. Their badges gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, impossible to ignore. The sergeant at the front desk visibly paled, his hands freezing mid-typing. Walter didn't glance at him. He didn't need to. His focus was already set. Behind him, more agents entered. Men and women in dark suits carrying thick folders, laptops, and a weight of authority that pressed down on every soul in the room. They moved with quiet, terrifying efficiency, like a machine that had been oiled and waiting for this very moment to roar into motion. Coleman took a step back, confusion flickering across his face, then anger. "You can't just barge in here," he snapped, trying to pull authority back around him like a threadbare cloak. Walter finally spoke, his voice low, but carrying through the station like a hammer strike. "I already have." The words hit harder than any shout could have. The sergeant scrambled from behind the desk, papers fluttering to the ground in his panic. Gloria watched it all from behind the cell bars, her breath steady, her heart hammering not with fear, but with something fiercer. Vindication. One of the agents walked up to the sergeant, producing a thick folder with a simple, devastating phrase, "Federal Civil Rights Audit. Effective immediately." The sergeant took the folder with shaking hands, his mouth opening and closing uselessly. Behind him, the younger officers exchanged nervous glances. They weren't stupid. They knew exactly what this meant. Another agent, a woman with clipped brown hair and eyes sharp as razors, walked straight to the evidence room. Another plugged a device into the precinct's main server, beginning to pull files at lightning speed. There would be no time to cover tracks, no chance to bury mistakes. The room buzzed with attention so thick it felt like the walls might crack. Walter approached the holding cells, every step deliberate, every movement precise. He stopped just inches from Gloria's cell door, turning briefly to the agent beside him. "Unlock it," he said simply. The agent produced a set of keys, stepping around a stunned Miller who backed up against the wall like he wanted to disappear into it. The key turned with a loud metallic clunk, and the cell door swung open. Walter didn't rush inside. He didn't offer dramatic reassurances. He simply stood aside, giving Gloria the choice, the power. Gloria rose slowly from the bench, her back straight, her wrists still red and raw from the handcuffs. She walked out of the cell without hesitation, her chin lifted high. For the first time that night, Coleman seemed unsure of himself. His mouth opened, searching for something, anything to reclaim the dominance he had so casually wielded hours earlier. Walter turned to him, and the look he gave wasn't angry. It was worse. It was cold. Final. "You will be held accountable," Walter said, his voice so calm it chilled the blood. "Every action, every lie, every abuse." Across the lobby, the phones were ringing off the hook. Officers scrambled from desk to desk, their faces drawn tight with panic. Out the front windows, Gloria could see flashing lights gathering, not police cruisers but news vans. Reporters with cameras slung over their shoulders were already jockeying for position. The story was out. One of the agents moved through the room, gathering body cams and hard drives, tagging evidence. Another agent began pulling personnel files. There was no shouting, no chaos. Just a cold, methodical dismantling of the very institution that had thought itself untouchable. Coleman tried again, his voice rising. "You can't do this. This is a local matter." Walter stepped closer, and Coleman instinctively stepped back. "When you violated her civil rights," Walter said, each word precise and cutting, "you made it a federal matter." The last word snapped the remaining resistance out of the room like a whip crack. Officers lowered their gazes. Some slumped against walls. Others busied themselves with fake paperwork, desperate not to draw attention. Out in the lobby, a low murmur started to grow louder. Protesters were gathering. Gloria could see them through the glass. Ordinary people holding handmade signs, their faces grim with purpose. Some of the signs read, "Justice for all," and "End racist policing." The world was watching. Walter motioned for Gloria to follow him. She did, her steps slow but sure. As she passed Coleman, she didn't spare him a glance, but she felt his eyes burning into her back, felt the rage and fear he was too small to hide. Outside, the night was no longer soft. It crackled with energy, alive with the voices of people who had had enough. Federal agents flanked Gloria and Walter as they moved toward the parking lot, the protesters parting to let them through. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. Questions rained down. Gloria didn't answer any of them. She didn't need to, because this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Inside the precinct, the silence was unbearable. The walls that once echoed with careless laughter and the shuffle of routine paperwork now seemed to press inward, heavy with the weight of judgment. Coleman stood stiffly against the wall, arms crossed, face locked in a mask of anger he could barely maintain. Miller hovered nearby, pale and sweating, shooting frantic glances toward the front entrance every time a new agent walked in. Walter Harris remained a calm center in the growing chaos, speaking in low, deliberate tones with the federal officials. Documents were exchanged. Evidence was gathered. Every officer's file was pulled. Every report from the night scrutinized with merciless precision. Then came the moment no one could stop. An agent with a sharp voice read from a folder in the center of the room, every word slicing deeper than a blade. Effective immediately, Officers Rick Coleman and David Miller are suspended pending federal investigation into civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, falsifying police reports, and unlawful arrest. The announcement hit like a hammer. Coleman's face twisted, disbelief flashing across his features. "This is a mistake," he barked. "She resisted arrest. She didn't have proper ID. You can't." "You lied," Walter said, his voice cutting through the protests like a scalpel. "You lied, and you assaulted an innocent woman. And now, you'll answer for it." Across the lobby, the younger officers looked away, some shifting uncomfortably, some slowly realizing they had hitched themselves to a sinking ship. An agent approached Coleman, holding out a box with a cold finality. Badge and weapon. Now, for a second, Coleman didn't move. His hand twitched toward his belt, some primitive instinct urging him to fight, to refuse. But then he caught the look on the faces around him, the cameras flashing through the windows, the agents ready to act, and he knew he had no power left. With a snarl of frustration, he ripped his badge from his uniform and slammed it into the box. The gun followed with a harsh clatter. Miller, silent and broken, followed suit, his hands trembling as he surrendered everything that once made him feel untouchable. The desk sergeant, who had once treated Gloria like a nuisance, now couldn't meet her eyes. No one could. Another agent stepped forward, holding a thick set of papers. "You are hereby notified that federal criminal charges will be pursued. You are advised to seek legal counsel immediately." Coleman muttered something under his breath, but nobody was listening anymore. The tide had turned, and he was already being swept away. Outside, the crowd had grown. Protesters lined the sidewalks, their chants growing louder, their signs bobbing like waves in a rising sea. Justice for Gloria. Justice for all. The mayor's office released a statement within the hour, filled with the usual platitudes about transparency and accountability, but it was too late. The city had seen too much. The videos had gone viral. Gloria's arrest, her dignity in the face of humiliation, the federal agents storming the station. It was all out there now, burned into the public consciousness. Walter turned to Gloria, his face softening for the first time that night. "You ready?" Gloria nodded once. No theatrics, no victory dances, just a quiet, unbreakable resolve. As they stepped out of the precinct, the crowd erupted into cheers. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters shouted questions, microphones thrust forward, desperate for a comment. Gloria paused on the top step, looking out over the sea of faces. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She wasn't just another black woman pushed around by a broken system. She was a symbol now. A reminder that sometimes the world could tilt, just a little, toward what was right. Walter placed a steadying hand on her back, and together they moved forward, not running from the noise, but walking straight into it. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every person who had ever been told they didn't matter. Every voice that had been silenced. Every injustice swept under the rug. And tonight, for once, the rug had been ripped away. Inside the precinct, Coleman sat alone in the corner, his badge gone, his future crumbling around him. No one came to his defense. No one offered him comfort. Justice had arrived. And it wasn't finished yet. The morning sun crept over Savannah, soft and golden, painting long shadows across the quiet streets. But nothing about this morning was ordinary. The video of Gloria's wrongful arrest had exploded across the internet overnight. News stations replayed the footage endlessly, showing the brutal injustice, the arrogant smirks of the officers, and the cold precision with which the federal agents had dismantled the precinct. Gloria sat at her small kitchen table, cradling a mug of cooling coffee, the hum of the news playing softly in the background. Her phone buzzed every few seconds, texts from strangers, from former patients, from old friends she hadn't spoken to in years. Some just wrote, "Thank you." Others wrote, "Finally." She scrolled through a few messages, her heart heavy and full at the same time. She hadn't asked for this spotlight. She had simply wanted to live her life with dignity. But now, dignity wasn't just personal. It was public. It was a fight she couldn't step away from anymore. There was a knock at her door. She opened it to find a woman standing there, young, determined, holding a clipboard and a hopeful smile. "Ms. Harris," she said, "we're organizing a march next week. For civil rights, for police reform, for you. We'd be honored if you led it." Gloria stared at her for a long moment, the weight of it all settling on her shoulders. Not just the injustice she had endured, but the hundreds, the thousands who had carried similar burdens without cameras or protests or headlines. She nodded once, firmly. "I'll be there." Word spread quickly. Flyers appeared in coffee shops, on college campuses, tucked into church bulletins. Black, white, young, old. People came together, not just to stand for Gloria, but to stand for a world where dignity couldn't be stripped away by a badge and a lie. The day of the march dawned bright and fierce. Gloria stood at the front of the crowd, a simple white shirt and jeans, no fancy slogans, no political speeches, just her presence. Strong, unshaken. Thousands walked behind her. Signs bobbed in the air. No more silence. Justice is not negotiable. Stand with Gloria. News helicopters buzzed overhead, capturing the ocean of people moving through the streets of Savannah like a living force. It wasn't violent. It wasn't angry. It was unstoppable. At the courthouse steps, Gloria paused, looking up at the building that had once symbolized everything stacked against her. Now, it symbolized something else. Change. She turned, facing the sea of faces. Cameras zoomed in. Microphones caught the soft, steady rise of her voice. "I didn't choose this fight," she said, "but I'm not walking away from it either. Not until dignity belongs to all of us. Not just some of us." The crowd roared. Somewhere in the mass of people, Walter Harris stood, arms folded, pride gleaming in his eyes. He didn't wave. He didn't shout. He just watched his daughter, calm, strong, unbreakable, step fully into the light. Later that night, when the streets had quieted and the banners were folded away, Gloria sat alone again at her kitchen table. This time, the coffee stayed warm. She smiled quietly to herself, the kind of smile that came from surviving a storm you weren't supposed to survive. The fight wasn't over. It might never be. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone. The truth was out. And once the truth is out, it can never be silenced again.